And
Okay.
I'm delighted to have the opportunity to speak with Melanie Lidman, a freelance journalist currently living in Israel. Melanie is one of the winners of the second edition of the Piazza Grande Religion Journalism Award, established and organized by the International Association of Religion Journalists and the Foundation for Religious Sciences, John 23rd. This award aims to honor the best journalism pieces which deal with various aspects of religion and spirituality. But you can find all the information about the award and the upcoming competition on the website of the International Association of Religion Journalists. Melanie, it's a pleasure to have you here despite the time zone differences, problem with the internet and this hectic period. So could you please share more about yourself and your work?
Yeah, well, thank you first of all so much for having me. Thank you for the award. It's really wonderful. I have been based in Israel on and off for about 15 years. I was the religion, environment, and migration reporter for the Times of Israel. I was also the Africa and Middle East correspondent for a news website about Catholic sisters called Global Sisters Report, which is a project of the National Catholic Reporter. And the story that I wrote about was about a Jewish Muslim motorcycle club in Copenhagen.
Mm-hmm. Yes, your article won the second prize, and it's very interesting, and it was really pleasure to read it. But can you tell me what was the process of writing it like, and how did you discover about the story, how it went, everything? What were your impressions through the whole
Well,
process?
I was going to Copenhagen with a friend kind of for
Mhm.
a fun trip. And oftentimes when I travel, I always try to look for interesting stories, interesting Jewish stories, because I write for the Times of Israel. And if I can, kind of we don't have a ton of coverage of Scandinavian countries. So even though there are small Jewish communities there, there's generally very interesting stories. And so I was kind of looking around and looking, I was mainly looking in the Jewish community to try and, pitch some stories to my editor at the Times of Israel. And I saw this kind of offhanded mention that, don't write off Copenhagen's Jewish community. It's a small but vibrant community. It even has a Jewish Muslim motorcycle club. And then they continued on, and I thought, wow, a Jewish Muslim motorcycle club, that is so cool. And I ended up finding them on Facebook, and the group had just returned from a pretty long motorcycle trip to Auschwitz. And so I think when you write a long time when you write for, a number of years in the Middle East, there's always this like, oh, Jews and Muslims doing something together, and like, that's so great. And of course, those stories are all great, but I really felt like this motorcycle club wasn't just saying like, oh, let's get Jews and Muslims together and clap our hands. They were really doing a lot of, they were visiting historical sites. They were visiting Auschwitz together. They were incorporating the community into some of their events. They were meeting with members of parliament. They were meeting with local religious leaders. And also they every year on the anniversary of Kristallnacht, which is November 9th, and it's a day when a lot of Jewish businesses were destroyed in 1938. And 3 years ago, there was vandalism that happened at a Jewish cemetery in a town called Randers, which is outside of Copenhagen. And so every year on the anniversary of Kristallnacht, since 2019, the group gets together and does this kind of like show a ride of solidarity where they visit a bunch of different Jewish cemeteries on the anniversary to kind of show that they're kind of guarding them, but they don't really stay a long time at each cemetery. It's really just a very important kind of show of strength and care. And so I really felt like this was a group of people that were not only bridging religions between themselves, but really working within the community to educate and improve tolerance among the wider Danish society.
Mm-hmm. My impression is, when it comes to, at least to a region where I live, is that there is no enough, let's say, enough articles about interreligious dialogue, and I think it should be. And what is your impression about those articles? Are they available enough? Do the journalists write about those topics? And if yes, what is important in that? And if no, why no? Not that.
Well, I think in Israel, and I think Israel is a little bit unique as opposed to the rest of the world because the conflict is so prevalent here and so and has been going for such a long time. There are a lot of there are countless initiatives that bring Jews and Muslims together, which I think is great. You know, there's chess clubs, there's judo for peace, there's ultimate frisbee for peace, and it's, I think, all of these groups that bring different religions together. It's very common in Israel, and I think it's great. But it does get a little bit it's hard to keep finding a new angle with those stories, specifically in Israel. I think that Israel is unique in that there's so much attention focused on a very small area that a lot of people, and there's so much attention focused on the conflict that a lot of people will come from abroad and do interreligious dialogue specifically in Israel. I think you're right. I don't think that happens in other countries, and I think that's a shame. For example, I don't think that happens as much in America. I'm originally from America. I'm from the Boston area. I don't think that type of interreligious, I know it does happen a little bit in the community where I grew up. We always had a Black Jewish Seder, for example, that kind of combined aspects of the African American history and the story of slavery with the tradition of Passover, when Jews recount the coming out of slavery in Egypt. So I grew up kind of, but those stories were never really covered by the press. It was kind of something that we did internally. And that's only also because I'm from a fairly liberal area that put a lot of emphasis on interreligious dialogue and interfaith work. But I do think you're right. I think that Israel is unique in that regard, and that there's a lot of attention focused on interreligious work. And I think it could it needs to happen in other places as well. And that's why it was such a joy to write about Jewish and Muslim relations in another country.
Mhm. Yeah, let's say in our case, in the region of former Yugoslavia, I often hear complaints of muftis or bishops that when they get along good, when they have some common projects or cooperate well, that it's just go unnoticed for the majority of the media. So they complain about that, which is reasonable to complain about that. And
Yeah, and I think it's hard because those are good news stories. It's good
mhm,
news when people are working together. And of course, as journalists, we're kind of bound to this idea, if it bleeds, it leads. We're looking for conflict. We're looking for bad news. And so it is, and it's difficult to write about these interfaith interfaith groups, you know, again and again and again, and try to find new and different angles to take to keep people involved. So I think you're right. That is a legitimate complaint. Like you're always writing about the bad stuff, and you never write about the times when we meet and we talk. And that's because meeting and talking is not really exciting to write about as in the media. So it's definitely something that we need to, as journalists, be aware of and understand ways to cover interreligious dialogue and look for interesting angles. Like for me, the motorcycles was like cool, you know, and I think that gave it just an interesting angle that I hadn't come across any other motorcycle clubs that were Jewish and Muslim together.
I just wanted to say, yeah, you really had a good angle, and the whole story is very vivid and inspiring in a way. Melanie, thank you very much, and see you. And we will read you.
Okay, well, thank you so much for having me. Thank you for the opportunities with the IARJ. I really appreciate it. I think that it's really important to tell these good news stories in addition to all of the difficult things, that there's a lot of good news that is happening in religion, and it takes a little bit more digging to find them and to find fun ways to tell those stories, but it's really important to do that. So thanks for the opportunity and for the support.